Good afternoon, fellow painters. Thank you again for joining me with another wonderful workshop. Continuing on with our winter series, today we're going to be working on a tree portrait, specifically one that is in the winter time. I've already got the image sketched in with my charcoal pencil. You can definitely pause the video here and get your image sketched in. Remember not to do all the details like we always talk about, just put in the large shapes. Tree branches and all that will come in at the end, so just draw your trunk and the major tree branches and your horizon line and we can get started. So I've got a medium-sized paintbrush, and today we're going to start a little differently. We're going to put in our foreground tree first and then work our background and the winter snow around it. So right now I'm just putting down a basic blocking in of the tree. It's nothing too dark, not too light either, sort of a medium shade. I've just sort of mixed in some of the brown with the white, and I'm just blocking that in. Now this canvas that I'm using here today is much larger than the usual canvas. This is actually a 20 by 16 sized canvas. Normally we'd work with a 9 by 12 or an 8 by 10 on these workshops. So definitely, if you're going to go with a larger canvas like what I have here, take your time, work in stages. Because these are pre-recorded, you can stop them at any time, take a break, come back to it the next day, and continue with the work. So again, I'm just blocking in that tree. Now in this particular composition, the sun is coming from the right-hand side. And so anything on the right-hand side of that tree is going to be lighter and brighter. And the back side will be on the left, and things over there will be darker. So I'm just going to add in some of that darker area into the back of the tree. With winter painting, winter scenes, I do a slightly different approach than I do with the summertime. I find the winter ones are more monochromatic. There's not a lot of variation in color. You've got mostly blues and whites, grays. You've got some brown in there, so there's not a lot of extreme color. And basically what we try to do is we work on finding where the light is and showing that in our work. So I'm just working through the lines that I've drawn for the tree trunks. And some of these here behind the tree are going to be more in shadow. And then the ones, of course, to the right are where the sun is hitting across. So at this point I'm really focusing on the dramatic difference between the shadows and the light areas on that tree. And it looks like I'm putting a lot of detail in, but I'm not actually putting a lot of detail in. The brush I have is fairly large for the area that I'm working with. I'm just kind of blocking in dark areas, blocking in light areas. And when you do that, it starts to take shape and form. Now this tree has a lot of characters, so I'm going to be drawing in some of these really cool curvy branches. They really give it a unique shape. I almost like trees better in the winter because you're not having to deal with all that foliage and things like that. It's, for me, it's sort of like painting the skeleton, I suppose, of the tree. So you're really working on the actual shape of the tree and the character of the tree, and you don't have the foliage sort of overshadowing what the tree looks like underneath. So it's kind of neat to look at these things this time of year. I'm really taking my time here to get these branches in. I've added some red now to the lighter brown that's on the brush, And what this does is it reflects, it shows the reflection of the light, like the sunlight on a tree. If you look carefully, especially when the light is very bright, the tree almost glows. And so the redness that's there will mimic that. So I've got a slightly different brush now, and I'm going to add some yellow onto the more pronounced highlights of the tree. And these are usually, if you look at your photo, they're usually areas that are more prominent, where the sun is really hitting that section of the tree. I placed the tree on the page in a particular manner as well. Lately, I don't definitely draw the entire thirds out, but I do use a ruler to find those squares of the thirds, which is basically dividing your width by 3 and your height by 3 and drawing lines across, which will give you 9 squares on your canvas. And it's where the squares meet that you need to try to have your most interesting areas, your focal points. And so if you were to divide this particular canvas in 9, you would see that that area that I have on the main trunk that has a lot of yellow on it is where those 9 squares intersect. It's a third of the page. So now we've got all the warmer areas in. I'm going to start adding some blue, some Prussian blue is usually my preference for the winter time. Mixing that with my brown just to get a cool shade, and I'm going to be applying that into the shadow areas. And that's going to darken down those shadows. And anytime you make a darker area darker, even darker than what it is, the lighter areas around it automatically look brighter and lighter. I've said this before in workshops and videos that if you're painting something and you have a particular area that you want to really make it pop and really make it nice and bright, and it's already as white or as bright as you can possibly go, because white is as far as you can go with it, in order to make that area really stand out, add more dark. Darken up your darks and your lights will look lighter. It's the contrast that your eye is attracted to, and that's what will make the difference in your work. So right now I'm just working on that very back edge of the tree that we can't actually see, but you can just see the very edge of it, that it's the furthest away from the sun. And we're building that out to be a much darker area. And that's going to give a nice contrast to the lighter areas in the front part of the tree. So at this point I'm pretty happy with the tree, and I'm going to start to put in some of that sky. And yes, it is a lot harder to put the sky on in between the branches, but it does give you a different effect than when you put the sky down first, wait for it to dry, and then paint tree branches or whatever you're painting over top of that sky. So try both methods when you're painting. There's no right or wrong. There's no absolute. It's whatever it is that you're looking for at the time. And you'll know what I mean when you try out both methods. And some people absolutely hate one and like the other, and vice versa. So, I mean, go with whatever works for you. I like to change it up because I like to challenge myself. It's when you challenge yourself, that's when learning begins. And that's when you start to improve. If you're always doing the same thing the same way, you're never going to get a different result. It's when you start changing things and trying something new that that end result is going to change. Sometimes it changes for the worse, and sometimes it changes for the better. But life is like that too, isn't it? So I'm just going to do a time lapse of this section here because it's actually a little tedious to watch. But basically what I'm doing is I'm starting with a darker blue over on the left, and as I head towards the right hand side, the sky is going to get lighter. So I'm at the point where I want to put in that hazy bit that you usually get in the wintertime that's between the sky and the ground. It sort of sits on the horizon. So I'm using, it's a very light colored blue. And I'm going to put that in softly and blend through with the blue that's there. So I'm coming up to another section now where I want to put in the very far tree line. And that tree line in the image that we have here, it's got that kind of pinkish, brownish hue to it. So I'm mixing up a little bit of red and white with some of my brown. And it's going to be very, very soft, almost a pastel color, because I don't want that color to come up to the front. I want it to stay in the background. As you know, the darker colors tend to make things look closer, and the lighter colors make things look further back. And I'm just kind of smooshing it around. I'm not using any particular scientific stroke here. I'm just laying down again blocks of color, blending it into the white that's already there, just to soften the edges. Everything in the back, I want it to be nice and blurry because I want it to give the illusion of being far away. So now I've got a darker brown mixed with a little bit of red and a little bit of blue on the brush. And I'm putting in some of those shadows that I see that are here in behind the tree. And if you've ever looked at snow in the winter, once it's been trodden on, you've got little divots of darker areas. You've got snow that's been kicked up and forms a peak, and that usually picks up the light of the sun. You've got bits of grass and dirt coming through where it's starting to melt. So it's really, I mean, to me, when I'm looking at it, it's very abstract looking and it's very interesting as well. And then on top of that, you've got the shadows of the trees laying over top and sort of bending and weaving in and out of the divots. So it's it's really, I find it really fascinating to paint because there's lots of different shapes there. And you don't have to paint everything that you see in that image, or if you're painting outdoors, anything that's in front of you, you're the artist. You choose what you want to paint and what you want to include in your work. We're not taking a photograph, we're creating a work of art. Now I'm also doing darker areas onto that right side of the tree, but as you can see, the paint that I'm using on that side isn't as dark as the paint that I put on the other side. Shadows are not the same shade and tone and value everywhere in front of you in your image, even when you walk outside. If you ever, next time you go for a hike or you go for a walk, take a look at the shadows and you'll notice there's different darknesses, different colors even in those shadows. They're not all just the same. Being able to paint and create artwork, a lot of that is observation of life. And even if your intent is to create abstract work, it's still, I believe, important to know how to create realistic type work and to be able to make observations of life, because that can help you create beautiful work. So now I'm going to go to the other end of the spectrum, and I've got a nice bright lemony yellow mixed in with white, and I'm going to block in the light areas that I see on the canvas. I often like to get the two extremes in, the very dark and the very light areas. And that kind of gives me a gauge of what the in-betweens need to be. And for me, the very darkest areas of a scene and the very lightest areas, that for me is where the interest is. That's where my eye is drawn to. It's the kind of thing that I really want to capture when I'm painting. So we're just very slowly building and building and building. And I like to start with a value and find everywhere on my canvas where that value should go. So I've got a medium blue, and I'm just working that into the areas where I feel the medium blue belongs. And some areas are going to overlap, and some areas you'll paint over that you painted already, and that's okay. It's good to let your work evolve as you go along and not to feel too restrictive. The important thing to remember when you're painting a winter scene is not to paint your entire canvas white, because it will just look like a big white canvas. And some of these images that you might use might look like it's just a big white sheet, in which case I challenge you to go outside in the sun, in the shade, and take a look at the snow. The snow is very much like water. Well, snow is water basically, it's just a different form of water. And snow will reflect back the same colors that are around it. So when we look at snow and it looks blue, basically it looks blue because it's reflecting the sky. So in essence, when you're painting snow, you're painting water, except in a different form. So some of the rules that we use for painting water, you can also use for snow. The other trick is to make sure that you've got areas where your eye can rest, so that your scene isn't too busy. So that's what I'm working on right now, is this area here to the bottom right. It does have variation in the color. There are sort of a gradient of a bluish gray that's going on. But in general, there's not a lot of detail happening, even though it's in the foreground. And it's just sort of an area for the eye to rest, and it's a nice contrast as well against the tree that has a lot more detail and movement going on. So at this point, the painting itself is just about done. We're at the stage where I like to stand back and take a look and determine which areas we need to make lighter, which areas we need to make darker, any area that's too busy or areas that need more movement happening. Sort of that fine-tuning point. It's tricky though, because you don't want to overdo it. You don't want to go in and really start doing too much to it. I like to keep things, especially now, a lot more loose, a lot more open, almost a very slightly unfinished look to it. painterly is what some people like to call it. It just allows then the person viewing the painting to sort of fill in the gaps. Just going to add a bit more bright yellow to the bright areas. A little bit, almost a very light whitish, so there's sort of snow sticking in. You know how when the snow blows and sometimes it'll stick to the side of the tree? So just kind of adding that in there. And when that happens, the sun really reflects off of that little area of snow. Almost like little sparkles on the tree and the tree branches. And now I'm going to go back into the shadows and darken those up, using some of the brown mixed in with some of that Prussian blue. If you want to use black, you can. I don't use black anymore. I find it's too harsh, especially for when you're doing nature. There's no true black in nature. Even something that you think is black, if you look at it carefully, it's not a true black. Black is the absence of color. There's very few things that are really that black, like a manufactured black. Just sort of redefining some of these branches a little bit. You take your time with this part of the process. Just add a couple things and step back. Don't go too crazy. You don't want every single branch to be exactly the same, because when you're looking at a tree, depending on where the sun's coming from and what's in front of it and what's behind it, every branch is going to look different. I just wanted to add a little bit of the grass poking up through the snow. The grass in our image is a different style than what I'm painting. I prefer the one that I'm doing right now. I've got a nice reddish tinge to it as well, which is nice because that little reddish pinkish tinge reflects what we have going on in the background. And I know I've mentioned in other videos and other workshops that it's always nice to have If you're going to introduce a color into your composition, to make sure you've got it in more than one place. Otherwise the eye gets drawn to that one spot that has that one color that sticks out. Unless that's your intention. Sometimes that's what we do intentionally. We want the viewer to be looking at a particular spot. But if you're doing landscape painting and you want the viewer to be looking around at the canvas and following the movement, you want to be able to bring the eye in and around the painting by putting the color throughout. So I'm just kind of putting in the grass. Then I'm going to be doing the highlight of the grass on that right side. Put the shadow in over to the left of it. Another clump of grass over here. I'm just working on refining some of these edges. Some of the edges you want to fade into the background, especially on the tree branches, the thinner tree branches. You don't want them to be sharp and distinct, because when you look at a tree and it's got thin branches, your eye, it blends in to the background. The challenge of where a lot of us now are using digital cameras, and digital cameras will take a picture of everything in super clear clarity, whether it's close to you or far away. Everything looks like it's the same. And in real life, when you're standing looking outside, the only thing that's in focus is that small area that you're actually staring at. Everything in your peripheral vision outside of your area of focus is blurred out. So you're going to take a palette knife with a nice thick chunk of the white titanium mixed with a teeny bit of blue. And we're just going to chunk in some snow, some big chunks of snow in and around our grass. And put a little bit in the background, but not too much. You don't want it too chunky in the background, because then that's going to move that object forward. Remember, things that are in detail are in front, things that are blurry are further back. Just adding some to the tree now as well, the base of the tree. Of course, you know, in the winter the snow sits on the ground, but then the wind blows and it pushes it up against the tree and causes a snowdrift. So we're just kind of adding those in, and those are the areas where the sun is hitting them, so they're nice and bright. And when you put them up against, like I just did, I had some shadow areas, so I put them up against the shadow areas, and then instantly we've created a little snowdrift because we've got the bright area in the front and your dark area in behind. If you don't have a palette knife, you can definitely just use your brush for that. These plastic palette knives I have are very inexpensive. They're not premium quality, but they're certainly good enough for adding in the paint that you need. So we've come to the end. We're finished. And always make sure that you sign your work. I like to use my initials. I hope you enjoyed this workshop. I know it was a little bit different than some of the others that I've done. If you have any comments or questions, you can always send me an email, send me a message on my Facebook. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.